right now explaining what are predictable patterns and how cause and effect works. But that won't always be the case, because it wasn't always the case. There was a time when we focused much more on the spiritual and the practicalities of being spiritual and thinking about God from a theological perspective. So I can't tell you why this works, but it does, and it leads to, in my experience, sustained energy and happiness in a way that sort of all of the things that we're told in life will bring happiness at superficial level. And what I'm talking about there are the things you were talking about today. This is not about me and my ego. This is about us. And to the extent we can walk through life thinking that this is not about enriching myself, making myself more powerful, making myself more prestigious, I think it leads to a more life-sustaining and happier existence. I'll stop there.
Is there any way to?
What is it?
It's hard to hear this.
Is everyone muted? We need to mute one more person, I think, up there. Yeah, so we don't get the great.
No, I think it is yours.
Thank you. Second panel member?
Yeah,
Cecily?
well, I haven't got a rational bone in my body. My children would describe me as loosely tethered to this earth. And so I come from a different perspective and often end up in the same place, but I come from a different perspective. I come from an experience of what is the spiritual journey for me? The spiritual journey for me, well, let me reverse and say, one of my favorite fantasies is the Holy Spirit flies over a bassinet that contains an absolutely gorgeous African-American boy baby and says, you, Michael Jordan, basketball. And guess what? Michael Jordan, basketball. You, Michael Jordan, basketball, and share. And guess what? Michael Jordan played basketball and shared. Well, that didn't happen to me. And that doesn't happen to most of us. Most of us fumble, fall, get hurt, get broken, and have to pick up the pieces and ask the question. And if we are so blessed, the questions will be, who am I? Why am I here? What am I meant to be doing? I am divorced twice. Not a good thing. I could have said to myself, I was married at 22 and I was divorced from my first husband. I could say, you were really young. You made a poor choice. And in my 40s, when I was divorced from my second husband and broken, utterly broken, small town, 2 outstanding community leaders, shame. And a voice came to me that said, okay, not a poor choice. When you are 22, maybe a poor choice. How about if the poor choice is you? Now that's about as much fun as lying on a bed of nails. And that's where it all began for me. Who am I? Who am I? What are the gifts I'm meant to bring? What is the love I'm meant to share? How am I meant to express myself in this world? How do I pick up the pieces? And I wasn't easy. And go forward. So some of it was, okay, God, you've got my attention. I surrender. Maybe the most powerful words or way of living that I know of. I surrender so that I might hear you speaking through me and leading me.
So, yeah, so I think we all come to it in different ways, but I believe that, the examined life, like taking this on as a project or journey, is really valuable, and it's kind of what, tying it back to Paul's sermon this morning. I think we all have this impulse or yearning that, there's something more, there's something better, there's something spiritual, there's something greater than what we're doing now. And I think that impulse kind of has always been a part of me. And again, I think, Cecily's story, and Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, is famously, he, was at his bottom of all bottoms when, he started on this examined life journey. And for me, it's always been kind of a curiosity. What is it to live fully human? And like Paul's sermon this morning, like, wow, the kingdom of heaven is available. Like, what's that mean? Like, what's it all about? And, in the beginning, I think it's okay to start selfishly. Like, I'd love to experience a little bit of heaven, and, and that's okay, however you come to it. And, I think that there is this yearning for flourishing. We have this human impulse, and in science, they call it the homeostatic imperative to survive and thrive.
Sexy.
Exactly, very, very sexy biology terms. But we basically have this, we're hardwired to want to survive and thrive. And I think that impulse is a good impulse. And we just, continue to follow it, and it'll take you on lots of twists and turns. And that's exciting. And I think, we're never done with the process. It's always evolving, and there's always, more awe, more joy. How much joy can we sustain? As you asked this morning, there's always more, and it's available 24/7. And we just need to sometimes get out of the way, surrender. And, I think it's, I think Dave and I have had a bunch of conversations about this. And, he always says, it might take effort to have an examined life, but it's a lot more painful and a lot more effort not to have an examined life, with all the mistakes and all the pain you cause yourself. So, if we're on the journey and on the road, it's always a healthy and a better alternative than not being on the examined life. And that's my quick overview.
We are allowed to respond to each other.
Well, yeah, so let's just go first, and I'll share a little bit, and then I would say that we can respond, and then all of us can jump in, because I think it would be really fruitful just to have kind of a group exploration, let's say, group discussion, group exploration. And I'll just share, there are things that all of you say that touch on what I would say, which is not surprising. But I go back to, as many of you heard me say so many times, one of Jesus' statements in terms of why he was here. What was his purpose? What was he about? Why did he say everything that he said, and why did he do everything that he did? And to me, he wrapped it up by saying, I came so that, he lays it out, so that you may have life and have it abundantly. Right? And then the question is, what does that mean? What does that mean to have abundant life? I came so that you may have joy, so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full. Very powerful statements in terms of, this is why I'm here. So then, what does it mean to live that? And I'll just tell a little story that it made me think of this when you were sharing what you did, Cecily, that I kind of got a jump start into a midlife crisis, I guess. I don't know, midlife reprioritization values, I like to call it. But when I was 21 years old, my mom retired when she was 57. She retired in May. And I shared a little bit of this with you just the other day. She retired in May, and then she had waited. She was a really good saver. Strimper and Saver. And so she kind of waited to, live life until all of our kids, all the kids were grown and everything. And I had just graduated from college, so I was the last of 4. And so she retired and she was going to go on business trips with my dad and just really start living and everything. So that was May. In July, she got cancer. And the short story is, and she died in December. So she had pancreatic cancer, which we didn't even realize that that's what it was at the time. So, so that made a big influence on me in terms of the examined life. I'm 21 years old and I see this, and then 5 other people who were very close to me, including 3 in their 20s. One of them was Scott Tryon, who Scotty Tryon, who was a 22-year-old who had lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life, and walked with him through his chemo and through his death. And another guy, and 20-year-old, and I took Kung Fu then, and he fell on me literally as he died, having an aneurysm. And then another one in a car accident, another one with leukemia. And then our across the street neighbor who went to my mom's funeral December, 6th, and then died in the end of December. So all this was happening, and it pressed me very early on to go, what the heck is this life about? And what do I want to do? And so I asked the question to myself, what do I want to do with the majority of my waking hours? The key time and energy in my life. If nothing else, if money doesn't matter or anything like that, because it's a short trip. I mean, I learned that life can be very fragile. Life can turn on a dime. And before my mom got sick, she was literally in the peak of health. She was just absolutely glowing with health. So that turned my life in a direction that ends up, where I get to do what I do and have these kinds of discussions with a lot of people. And I kind of shared part of it today where, I realized at that age, it's like, what's my life about? It's like, I want to make the world a better place than where I found it. It's just, it's very simple. I'll love people, help people, serve people, that type of thing. And as you say, and that journey continues, and it continues to evolve, and it changes, when I got married and had 4 kids and stuff. And so it continues to fine tune and evolve. But I also get in a lot of conversations with people, some people who have an extraordinary amount of time on their hands, tends to be, younger people, single people who have almost too much time to think of, what is my life about, and are thinking about it more than they're living it. So I would say, then there comes a point in time where it's like, what's that perfect, that perfect amount of, the examined life versus, hey, stop thinking about it and just go on, do something. Because I see some people who are paralyzed by thinking about it too much. So what's the right way to think about it? And to me, I always go back to the abundant living. What does that mean?
I wanted to say after that, I left that town. I went to live someplace all by myself, close to the ocean. And I wanted to listen to God. I didn't know how to listen to God. I had no clue how to listen to God. But I figured that I could do that if I just allowed that to happen. I had friends who said, we'll get into therapy. Not yet. I'll do that sometime, but right now this is between me and God, because I missed the boat. Whatever my boat is, I missed my boat. And I don't know if any of you have ever had that feeling, but it's a little scary. And so I walked on the beach in January, February, March, April, in the cold, in the wind. I wrote 1 million journals, filling out everything that I possibly know about myself. Amazing things happened, people. Suddenly I realized God had my back. Things fell into place one after the other. I got a job. I went to graduate school. I got degreed. I found a place where I could be ordained, having been refused by the Episcopal Church to having been married twice. I was a fallen woman, and the bishop said he would pray for my mortal soul, that I would never be accepted. in the Episcopal Church ordination track, even as a diaconate. By the way, the last paragraph said, and I will never ordain a woman under any circumstances anyway. So that wasn't available to me. A friend stopped by one day for tea. She was on her way past my village to another village, and she left a copy of the Village Voice on my coffee table. Say goodbye to her and picked up the Village Voice. Heard about it for years. Right there on the front page of the Village Voice is a description of the Seminary for Interfaith Studies, founded by the Rabbi Joseph Gelderman. I read about it. Yes, that's where I want to be. I want to study the great religions of the world. That's perfect. And I called up right then and there. I got the rabbi. He said, we start next 2 weeks. Can you come? I said, you bet I'm there. And I spent 2 of the happiest years of my life in that school. One of the important things I've learned in my spiritual journey, and then I'll stop, is that some of the biggest no's to us, some of the no's that we get, you can't have that, you can't go that way, you can't do it this way, are the universe talking to us, in a sense almost saying, I've got a better yes for it, but some things have to happen first. So I wrote a piece for myself about my most important no's in life. And maybe some of you have some of those in your story as well.
So here we are. We are, so, with very different paths and experiences, and one abundant life is different from what the next abundant life would mean, and how that would look, and how you get there, and where you are in the journey, and we can have a wonderful time talking back and forth with ourselves, that we can certainly do, but also I just want to invite your thoughts, your feedback, questions, ideas.
If I could just try to synthesize what we've said.
That would be interesting.
And it's all very interesting, and I think it's all very true, because each of us have our own truth. But at the end of Cecily's last remarks, the room felt silent, and we all just paused. And I think Jesus and Cecily's stories, and I'm sure we all have them, would often retire to the mountains or the desert to get away. And somebody once said, you don't get away because you don't like people. Some of us sometimes do get away because we don't like people. It's the introvertedness. But you get away so that you can be with the people and more fully with the people and find the unitive spirit with the people. So that was what came to me when I listened to.
Can I ask you a question? When you, what's your name?
Jim.
Jim, Dave. When you said we all have our own truth, what do you mean by that?
If everyone had time to take the 2 minutes that you have, I think we would find the journeys are very, very different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
and in that,
Yeah.
it's our truth.
I see.
Some say no, some say yes, some say
Yeah.
welcome, some say detour.
Yeah.
Some say it's joy, but some say it's the grief.
Yeah.
But it's all part of, I think, the journey.
Yeah.
That's the, we all have our own truth,
I see.
our own experience.
Yeah. One of the things that I've shared with Don is my view that there is universal human truth in the human existence. And that doesn't come through the things that we perceive through our 5 senses, the things that are the world, the unreal. That's the unreal. Truth is in love and forgiveness and charity and service. All of those things that we don't perceive through our 5 senses, but we know exist and have a universal human draw and have throughout time and age and culture and geography. And that's at the core of what I'm searching for.
So just a comment.
Yeah, go.
beyond the five senses.
Yeah.
Is infinity. And God and
That's
the
right.
Word and love is infinite before we were born and after we die.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, like a turtle hatching by the shore. We're all heading in the direction of the water. Some of us are going to get picked up by seagulls. Some of us are going to get caught up in the marsh. But we're all heading there.
We're trying.
And that's the infinity of it all, in my
Yeah,
humble opinion.
a lot of us get distracted by things that tempt us and pull us.
We have a lot of clutter.
But you were thinking, I think.
Let's hear it.
I was gonna, it had to do with when you first, by the way, thank you all. I think it's so great to hear different perspectives. Thank you for being here and motivating us and interesting us. It's all interesting, your stories. And when you began, you were talking about truth, one truth. And I went, really? Because I too feel like Jim, that we all have our own truth. And for me, that could be, I guess that has to do with senses. I remember walking down the street of New York City with my best friend in my 20s, and she said, wow, it's a beautiful day. It's so gorgeous. And I literally have been thinking at that moment, it smells, look at all the trash, it's dirty. I'm like, what's true? But so that is what we're sensing.
Yeah.
But at that moment, it was true for me that New York was a dirty place. It was true for her that it was alive and beautiful. So how do you reach someone? I think I understand what you're saying about universal truth.
Yeah.
But how do you lead someone who's in the truth of a pain to see that?
Let me say something, because there's something that hit me about that, which was, as an example, I think one of the universal, not I think, one of the universal truths that we all come up against, that we all live with, is the fact that we're going to die. Right? So no human being has ever been physically immortal. And so then, with this question that we are all here, we're just passing through. We're all here for a limited time. We don't know what that limited time engagement is. Then gives us all the question of, so what are we doing with the time? Whether we have just been diagnosed with terminal illness and we think we have a couple of years to live, that's the big question. That's when feet really get put to the fire of, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do with my time that I have left? Or, we're 35 years old and we're, kind of under the delusion that we're going to be here forever. We might live like that, with the choices that we make, or maybe, maybe we hit, 63 and they go, okay, so how many really, kind of vital years do I have left, and how many just total years do I have left, and what do I want to do with that time? So, when I think of, one of the many universal truths, that's one of the things that I think about, is that that's all of our questions. And interestingly, I had a guy in his 80s come to my office not long ago, and he goes, I just realized I'm going to die someday. And I never thought about that. I was like, wow. Yeah, kind of in a way, it's a little bit of a blessing, but then, and was, thinking about the choices now and, meaning and so forth. And it's kind of cool and kind of frightening, maybe if you just haven't, I can't imagine what life would be like, not asking that question, but anyway.
I have another comment I'd like to make as I'm thinking about all the stories that we're hearing about individual journeys. I am also aware that on my journey, as I've been trying to answer all these questions, I have become increasingly aware of the connectivity that we all have, and that in fact my individual journey is a parallel with others, and I'm constantly marveling at how at seemingly just the right time somebody shows up, either that I know or haven't known, with an important piece of information, experience, something that advances the journey. And I think that especially in Western societies, we have this intense focus on the individual, but I'm increasingly certain that the spiritual journey is a collective thing. And that's part of the reason why we're in the room today. And we seek ever more for connection and community in ways that we are not experiencing. And I think actually this is exactly what we're looking for.
Mark and I have had lots of conversations about this. Mark is the director of the Trinity Spiritual Center over at Trinity Church. And I absolutely share your conviction that we are all interacting all the time in this amazing, miraculous, collaborative way. The scientists would call it the biofield, that we are all living beings live in a biofield that we share. And that's an energy field that carries information and the life force. So we're in this dance, as it were. I also agree with Dave totally that the ultimate truth is love. How do we get to the place where our hearts are open and we can just love, act out of love? I don't imagine for 1 second I'll get to that place before I die, but I do see it. I do see it as everything that's happening around me. Everything that's happening around me saying, this is where it goes, this is where it goes, this is where it's going. It goes to connected love.
It's a giant co-creation.
Well, it's interesting going back to the death, death is certain. We don't know when. You told the story today about a 26-year-old getting COVID and passing away.
Wow.
So we know death is certain, we don't know when. So what's important? And that, in essence, is what is the examined life? Like, or what's important? Like you had that arise when you were 21. I think we all have different impulses and different urgencies and different whatever, and we have a bunch of different paths. I don't believe there's like the universal truth. Dave and I have had this conversation. I think that, we're if you believe in Darwinian evolution, we're a species that has certain capability. Like there's this thing called electromagnetic spectrum. We can only perceive 1 billionth of it. And that's something we know. That's a known unknown, right? And, believe in God, like everyone here does, like we have an unknown unknowns. Like it is infinity. It's like it's reality, and God is infinity. And we have very limited, humble human capability of grasping that. But we do have this really important internal impulse and guiding system that looks for quality and truth. We put together and we discuss it, and it is communal, and we agree on it, and it changes over time. There is no universal truth that's absolute and going to be there, other than we're in the image of God, or that we are the source is God, and we can feel that awareness. Like feeling that awareness, and we can talk about meditation as well. Like when you let go of all the craziness in your mind, there's something there that's consciousness, awareness, union with God. It's an experiential thing that a lot of people describe, but you really need to experience it in order to grok it and understand it deeply. And that is the only universal truth. Like love, you could say that's love, but that's just a semantic thing. Everything that we can construct and we can go there. We move through the world and making progress towards God, getting closer to God, closer to reality. We're never going to get there. We have no idea what that even is, and we never will. Like if you look at what modern physics is, like we always thought that, all this stuff is hard, there must be an atom there. And then we got to the atom, it's like, there's electrons, neutrons, and the electron, that's not even really there. That's just muons and quarks and stuff. And then we got to muons, it's like, that's not even there. Like the more we go infinitely small, Like, we have no idea what's there. And so again, I think objective reality, you know, it's like an ant trying to describe the human life. Ants can't describe the human life. Humans can't describe God, but we can get closer and closer and closer, and we can follow our homeostatic imperative or quality or union with God and all the right impulses to just keep moving in the right direction. And truths come, and we agree on truths. There are good explanations and there's bad explanations. And so it's not that truth is just relative. There are good explanations over time that we agree to, and that we as a community evolve our understanding and we agree on things.
But we're not talking about factual truth. When I talk about truth, I'm talking about what is life-sustaining, the things I've talked about, what will provide everlasting happiness and always has throughout time and age in the human existence. It always has throughout culture. But hold on, let me just finish. Yes. I don't know that they're used to this. I don't know that it evolves. I think that if you went back to the beginning of man, you would find that, you know, the experience of love is the same as the experience of love today. It absolutely is. And you're going to say, well, what's the evidence for that? And I'm going to tell you, I don't have, because there wasn't the scientific method back then. But one thing I will tell you, let me say this, is that, yeah, this is totally fun. It's not, we do this all the time. Yeah. And I love the community thing too, but I will tell you,
They have a video series.
we recorded ourselves to examine ourselves as we do this. So, but let me just invoke William James for 1 second. So when we talked about turn of the century psychologist, father of American psychology, many of you may know that. He's also a philosopher, trained as a medical doctor. So he's got this scientific perspective, but he is the founder of pragmatism, which is the idea that there are notions of philosophy and ways of living life that work for us. And one of those is religion. And he writes on the variety of religious experiences, because we experience religion, not doctrine or the institution of religion, but we have religious experiences in a variety of different ways. And this works. Somehow it works. And what he would say is there are certain things in human existence that arise only after you have accepted them without the evidence. By definition, you have to accept them without the evidence in order to experience that truth. And one of them is faith. We could go on for hours about James, obviously, but there are things that he was addressing the notion that it's unjustified to believe anything without quote unquote evidence. And he said, no, there are things that won't arise until after you accept them without evidence.
But that's the only way humans live. I mean, Karl Popper, philosopher, we don't need to go into this thing, but we all have theories. Meaning we're humans, everything's theory laden. In other words, we don't perceive anything. It's like empiricism is wrong and positivism is wrong. We don't just observe stuff and then come up with theories. No, we come into the world with theories. We're born with theories. We're human beings. We evolve. So that's kind of like totally accepted now that we come in with theories. But again, you talk about external sensations being like, oh, those are things. But interior, that's exterioception. The five senses are exterioception.
I'm talking about physiological reactions.
Our feelings, we have this whole range, like the external world we've really studied scientifically. The internal world we're beginning to study scientifically. And we have just as rich and nuanced an internal world as we have an external world. And we're now starting to study feelings and how what gives rise to feelings and all this other stuff. And it's really rich. It's like the stars, you don't see them when you're in New York City. But if you're out in the country, you see all this nuance in stars. That's what we're beginning to do with interior, and that's interioception. Go ahead.
So if I might say that listening to both of you, and then the floor is going to be Cecily's because I know she has something to
We
say.
know each other.
You both speak truth to me.
I thought
But-
I had.
I'm listening to both of you and I'm nodding my head. So, but interesting that the two of you feel like you need to be right.
Yeah, good point. No, that's a good
And
point.
then the other thing I picked up on is the semantics of there is no language, in my humble opinion, and we learn this, that can describe the ineffable. And you have your ineffable, you have yours, I have mine. You can't, somebody used the word biofield. I thought of, well, the Christian mystics would say that's the Holy Spirit, isn't it? That's the biofield. You're a scientist, you would like to call it a biofield. I would like to say, from my mystical faith, that it's the Holy Spirit. Anyway, Cecily, you had something to say. I just
Yeah,
wanted to-
and then I
break
said
that
the
up.
biofield is also the Holy Spirit, exactly, and that's how David Bohm would describe it. He would describe it as spirit, which is never born and never died, and plunging into something for which we have no evidence. I will share a personal story. I went to a retreat in upstate New York years and years ago, and I've had many such experiences since, okay? And went to bed that night and found myself flying. I had no body whatsoever. I was flying. I was flying over cities and looking at them, and it was a blast. I'm telling you, not having a body is really fun. Very light and very light. I'm seeing the cities, the lights are bright, and I see a building coming at me, and I'm thinking, whoa, because this is gonna hurt. And it doesn't. I go right through it. And then I go right through another one. And where I end up is I'm looking in the windows of a house. And I'm looking into the living room of that house. And I know absolutely I'm in California, looking at my brother and sister-in-law's new house in Montecito that they haven't moved into yet. So I decide, because I want to tell my brother about this experience, I decide to memorize the placement of the fireplace, the placement of windows, everything. There's no furniture there, but there's one gorgeous carpet in the center of the room. I memorize the colors and the patterns and the border, the whole thing. And I'm smiling and I'm having fun. And then I wake up by pouring into myself. This is how I experience it, as if I were liquid. And the top of me, my chakra here was open, and I poured into me as if I was a vessel, and I popped up in bed and said, I'm back. And the woman who was sleeping nearby, back from where? I didn't answer her. As soon as we had a break, I called my brother in California, and I said to my brother, I think I've seen your house, and I want to describe it to you. So I described the house, I described the living room, I described the carpet in detail, I described the placement of the windows. He was dead silent. I described the mantle, what it looked like, the shape of the fireplace. My brother was silent, and then after a little bit, you have to know my brother, he said, Seth, the next time you come to visit me in California, I would prefer that you bought an airline ticket like everybody else.
But you've never been there.
I've never been there.
Unbelievable. That's incredible.
No, it's not. That's the
No,
thing.
that's just an expression.
That's why. We have no evidence. I can't give you hard evidence.
No.
I have had any number
I
of
totally believe you.
experiences like that of traveling out of my body. I have also found dead people's consciousness, energy field in a room with a dead body right there on the bed. And I can find their pulsating, living consciousness somewhere else in the room. I'm loosely tethered to this earth. We don't even know yet. We're not operating on all our burners. We have so much more. And because I believe we live in this connected field, what we need to do is to be able to surrender our boundaries, our egoic trips about being right, or how things are. I got it figured out. I know how things are. My life has just turned myself upside down. I thought I knew how things were until all kinds of things have happened to me that showed me something else entirely, for which, by the way, I have no explanation.
Have you been practicing your mindfulness at
Meditation,
that time?
yes, a meditation practitioner. Yeah.
At the time of having that
For
experience?
40 years, I've practiced
Yeah.
meditation.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, wonderful question. So glad you brought it up. Is conducive to a kind of relaxation and a relaxation of the ego perceptions that might allow something like that to happen.
Yeah.
But I had no control over it. I never could do it by volition. I could be reading a book in my house and suddenly find myself flying over the beach, looking at all the kids and the family in the water.
There's a documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know?
Mm.
And it's really interesting because it is all about this. Like we're just at the beginning of infinity. There's a book by a guy named David Deutsch called The Beginning of Infinity. We literally have no idea what the unknown unknowns are, and it's infinity. And so it's, you know, again, Cecily's experiences, you know, we should be totally open to because we, you know, what the bleep do we know? and it's exciting because the one difference I would say is I believe it's really important to have conversations about these things and try to come up with explanations, because that's what progresses everyone. Because again, that's how we evolve as a civilization. Like, you know, 100,000 years ago, they were living in different ways. Culture evolves and we get smarter. Well, see, it certainly can.
It can devolve too.
It can devolve, it can evolve. And as Paul always says, you know, we're here to help thy kingdom come. And that's why we're on the earth. And I take that responsibility very seriously. I'm just not going to say, oh, sure, whatever you want, because I don't think that's our responsibility for thy kingdom come.
Yep.
And it's just okay that everyone has, their experiences and our experiences, and we never come together to say, oh, well, let's make sense of this. No, we as human beings make sense of this. And that's really important endeavor. As a matter of fact, probably the most important endeavor that we as a civilization
To you.
do.
And may I-
I'm just saying for the
To you.
progress of civilization, otherwise we'd be dying when we're 28 or
We're just
whatever.
gonna make
And
it
we get born, we suffer, we die. That's what it used to be like.
Jim, you made a good point in your observation. And by the way, I didn't respond to your question, but I will say that I'm not qualified to speak on any of this stuff. I'm just an observer of life. But Jim, if this was about him being right or me being right, you're exactly right. That would not be a useful exercise. The way, because it's wrapped up in ego. The way I regard it is Don and I are beating the hell out of each other to try to desperately get to the truth. And it's a way, Paul has told us that debate is a spiritual exercise. And that's the way I regard it. I don't think I'm right.
But when you retire to the quiet of your study and do your 40 years plus or minus of meditation, I believe you'll have it. I don't know that you'll find it here. And this is not to degrade the conversation, or is it, Paul? And then you will do the same when you take out your scientific book. I'm guessing you'll find your way, but it may or may not be. It may be. You may enjoy this banter, and that's fine too. I'm not trying to suggest.
I think it's actually critical. I think it's necessary.
But I
I
think
don't think you can go sit on.
beyond the ego, you mentioned the ego a few times. You mentioned the people that are in this room, and we think of, well, how am I being perceived? And that's kind of a false self. We've also touched on the true self, which is the Holy Spirit derived, love-based. When there's nothing more to do, there's only to serve in this world. It's the Christian mythics way of kind of believing what we're really destined to do. So there, you mentioned that false self, egotistical self will enjoy this, but I believe when we retire to our study and we do our meditation, we're seeking the true self.
But you
We're
said
seeking the
serve.
true self.
You said to serve. Like once you find the true self and the Holy Spirit, you serve.
You love,
You love and you serve.
you serve, and you realize, my humble opinion,
Right.
so St. Teresa said, it's time to think less and love more. St. Teresa of Avila, the great Christian mystic. It's time to think less and love more as you approach the inner castle where God dwells in us, in our God-given godliness.
Yeah.
And
again,
that's
it is-
what I can sense
Yeah,
it
and-
to, because that's my journey.
And it's not one or the other. Like we're thinkers and we're doers. And you have to have both. Like we just don't want to be running around doing without some reflection.
Well,
And
you're
you
very-
don't want to just reflect.
And you don't
You
want to
have to
just
serve.
serve. Right.
You have to. You have to.
And to serve is having that debate. I mean, again, you know, conjecture, we come up with ideas and we have experiences and we have ideas about those experiences. And then we have criticism when we have debate. And that's a really important part. It's not an ego thing to debate to see who can win a debate. It's to progress, thy kingdom come. So it's a real endeavor. It's not just an ego battle. It's a real endeavor to.
Did Jesus debate much?
Sure,
Sure.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. He turned over tables.
But in the true sense of this kind of arguing, I don't, I'm not a scholar.
Well,
he was right.
he obviously was so
Well,
light years beyond us,
That's
but when, you know, I mean, when they were asking him, who, you know, we should stone this woman, and he says, okay, let the person who's without sin. That's
That's not a debate.
Absolutely.
That's a kind of metaphorical way of teaching.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in my understanding, I mean, it wasn't a debate like, you know, let me share what I'm thinking and then you share what you're thinking and we're kind of back and forth and we'll discover the truth together. Because he was different and he's just saying, this is the way that it is, you know, and then people can and would bump up against that, right? And disagree or argue or whatever, or ignore, or, you know, whatever they're gonna do. But it wasn't like a give and take. I mean,
Because you couldn't do it with him.
you can't do it. I mean, you can't do it because you're talking, I mean, in the way I read it, like, you know, he is the truth and he's just sharing what it is. So you don't say, well, you know, that's your opinion, and this is the way I look at it. It's a waste of time. But anyway, but I'll just say something, just a little observation from a couple of things we said. So with what you're just, you know, the describing the out-of-body experience, it's also interesting that CIA and FBI also make use of that, and they have people and their trainings and so forth with remote viewing, right, to find people. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, but it works sometimes. And I think what that points to when it comes back to the examined life instead of just a cool experience, you know, is that it points to a truth that we're spiritual beings, you know, that there's way more to us. And I know what you said before is, you know, that it appears that we end at our, you know, end at our body, and that's just not, you know, that's not the truth of who we are. That's what that experience validates, and that experience validates things that, you know, that Jesus, his way of being, his entire orientation of life is that we are a soul. We're going through this life. The body's going to stop. The soul doesn't stop. And to live that way through our life in terms of, you know, kind of bringing it back to all of us, right, who maybe have had those experiences and maybe not. But that we are soul, and if we live our life with the understanding that our body is, you know, sacred to be appreciated, but not to freak out, you know, when our time comes to the end or something like that, then it makes for a richer life, because then if I'm that way, then that means you're that way too. And now I'm not going to necessarily relate to you as a, you know, based on your education, your personal history, you know, where did you go to college, how much money do you make? I'm not going to relate to poor people as, you know, because of their economic, you know, status. I'm going to relate to them as a soul also. I'm going to relate to, you know, to women. So then everybody becomes an equal, and it's a whole game. It's a radical game changer. And the cool thing is that, you know, is that when Christ would talk about this and the way he lived, and he said, you know, everybody's my brother and sister, and lived as if that was true in terms of how he acted and what he shared and so forth. That you know, you can say, well, that's, you know, kind of nice theory, until more and more people start having these experiences, and you go, you know, it really is seem to be true that we really are, you know, as they say, spiritual beings on a human journey. I mean, I did not make this up with any, but you know, we're not spiritual. We're not human beings on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings on a human journey,
Yes.
right? And it's a different orientation to life. And it does change the way, you know, in terms of that examined life and trying to, you know, have something that, you know, everybody could relate to, hopefully, that changes your orientation and your relationships and the way you kind of live life. So
Because of the things that have happened to me uninvited, for which I have no preparation whatsoever, I'm not wed to explanations, because I don't have any. So what's happened to me over it is how utterly miraculous life is. Knocks my socks off. we don't have a clue. We're living maybe just on this little bitty bit of ourselves when we are huge. We are huge. Now, I'll tell you a story. A man I knew was teaching in a school for disabled kids. And the kids came into school and the kids were having a fight. Two boys were having a fight. And they were grabbing at each other. I'm going to hit you with my truck. I'm going to knock your head off. I'm going to knock your head off. And the other kid responded by grabbing his shoulder and said, I'm going to do worse. I'm going to explain it to you. I told that story in my 20s. I've never forgotten it. So I wonder, if all together, we bring all these different gifts of real, intelligent awareness, looking for the science, looking for the explanations, trying to figure it out, trying to understand it. And then we also have the mystics like me who say, well, you just don't know what's going to happen next. And is that okay? To be a little out of control? Is that okay? Can we live like that? Can we live? My grounding is in Jesus. My grounding is absolutely in Jesus. Who had things that happened, he could share himself in ways that none of us would ever be able to dream of. And I read those stories and I say, yes, I gotcha. I couldn't do it, but I get it. And that's where you wanted us all to go, isn't it? That's what you were telling us. Follow me, love your neighbor as yourself, and don't be too wed to your body and your preferences and your likes and your dislikes and what's going to happen tomorrow. Don't be too wed to that. That isn't true aliveness. True aliveness is in the moment.
First of all, thank you. My brain's going, and I'm loving it. So thank you. A question I have, and I pose it to everybody, I'm just curious. I work with children and lived an adult life. Just curious as to at what point do you think or believe an examined life moment might happen? Is it when you're in childhood? Is it teenage? Is it when you have a traumatic experience, be it divorce or death of your mother and friends? Does it always have to be at a low point where you go, I'm on my knees? Or can it be at another time? And at what point can one have an examined life? And personally, I think it's examined and re-examined and re-examined. So I don't know if there's really one answer to that, but since the topic is an examined life, that is something I'm curious about. If the group has an idea of what that answer might be, not to say that there has to be one answer, but I'm curious to know if there's ever, do you think that you had an examined life? And if so, did it happen at a low point? Did it happen? I'm just curious.
It's a great question.
I think there's two questions there.
I think it is too. I mean, it is.
For me, there's two questions there, maybe, I think, are you asking when?
So you're saying it's ongoing?
I'm saying it's ongoing. For me, it started at a young age. I started being curious about things. And as I wandered through life, I'm more and more intrigued by various things. And I feel like I'm growing, and people who talk about, where I am in life, I'm 87. I don't have a lot more to grow. I have a lot more to grow, but I don't have many years to do it. But I'm still growing, and I will be, I hope, until I lose my brain.
That's not gonna happen
But
soon.
it's an ongoing process, and it's just part of life.
Somebody
So
else.
it's two questions. What were the two questions that I had sort of?
Well, I mean, maybe it's just me projecting, but it felt like
one question might be, how early do direct encounters with the divine occur? And I think it's from, they happen all the time. And it's just a question of whether or not we're being open and aware when they occur. And then I think the second question is, when do these questions about the meaning and purpose of life start to become a focal point in our lives? And I think it actually starts very early. We watch kids in preschool try on identities, and that playful interaction with their world is something that just continues if we're lucky until and so I just, and then it's like, so what is the meaning and purpose of that? It starts to become part of the play.
I just want to say that the kids I work with that have experienced trauma. So they can come to a pre-K3 class or pre-K4 class, and you've got someone who's had trauma. So I don't know if that trauma, either being neglected in the crib because parents are checked out or whatever, has allowed that stunted little human, potentially stunted little human, to have experienced that examined life. So that's some of the clientele I work with. And I'm just curious as to how to, I share the love and the light, blah, blah, thank you very much for tonight, or attempt to bring that into their world. I'm not the only one, but so that was part of my question.
So I think there's just a quick thing I say, and then I will be quiet. I think that in terms of level of experience, we have our bodily experience and our interaction with matter. Then we have the soul level experience, which is all the psyche and the interior world. But then there's a third level, which is actually the spirit. And that is what is untouched in us. And it's even in a child with trauma, there is that spirit level. And we have been sort of trained to not appreciate that as much as we can as we go through life. And it's really important that we keep going back to that thing that we are eternally, which is the spirit and part of the unitive field that we're all connected to.
So when I ask Martha, so let Martha speak, and I'm also looking at the time, and I know some people's time is starting to run out. It's 12:30, and we said second hour. So my question is that we do have an opportunity, if we want to continue this next week, that we can continue it. We do have a spot open, here. If anyone is interested, and so if there's that interest, then let us know and we'll continue the conversation. Otherwise, we're all going to figure it out in the next 2 minutes.
And Martha's gonna lead us.
Right, lead us to the promised land. Martha.
No, I'm laughing because I've had not as dramatic experience as Cecily has had, but spiritual experiences like that. And I came to church this morning and I got my gym bag in the car and I was like, oh, I just don't want to do that. I really don't feel like going to the gym, and I'll feel better having gone to church. And sure enough, I feel much more energized. And to me, that is a spiritual experience in a different way that, like I can go to the gym with enthusiasm. And to your question, I'm a therapist, I'm a psychologist, and I think that people come to examination of self and examination of life from very different perspectives. So there are folks who are going to take, the experience I had with the gym, as like that's, and let me tell you, I'm taking it as like this is like the spiritual experience. And there are folks who have experiences like that are different. I mean, I think we all have like different ways of looking at life. And I'm thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking sort of about even the folks, with sociopathy, examine certain parts of their life, and you would think folks without a conscience maybe would not, and they don't in the way maybe you and I do, but they do examine themselves and examine life. And this conversation is falling on the heels of, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who works in palliative care and talking about sort of legacy and you know, so when someone gets a terminal cancer diagnosis, like legacy becomes a thing that folks start speaking about and thinking about. And after that conversation, I kind of like made a marker, like, okay, I have the legacy here up until this conversation. And now I have to start thinking about, what do I want, you know, this is my journey, but what do I want my legacy to be going forward? And, you know, I could rest on my laurels. I've helped lots of people, you know, good night. But thinking about like, how is that going to look in this stage of my life? Anyway, those were my thoughts as this all was going on, but I had to share the gym thing. I was so not wanting to go to the gym. Now I have enthusiasm.
I do think one of the things we forget is that we are the divine. So we're not searching for the divine. We're not trying to get in touch with the divine. We are the divine. We are love. We are. So yes, you know, should we spend time thinking about it? Absolutely. Because, you know, so Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. So you're right. We call it the Holy Spirit. The language that you use is still all defining the same kind of thing. And, you know, if we can remember that we have always been and we always will be as we are, then, you know, it's a blip on a screen. And we get so obsessed by it because right in this moment of consciousness, this is all we know, unless we set ourselves apart and go to the other. And flying dreams, I'm with you, it's spectacular. And you can all do it. You should all just tell yourself before you go to bed tonight, I'd like to fly. And, you know, because it is the most amazing thing to do. And it's so much fun. But because we're not. We just need to be our divine selves to be divine. So, yeah, right, you know, that's kind of where it comes.
There we go, last word. I will say, I'll be here next week, and I think that we said that we could be here next week. We'll see if there are any other takers, right? I mean,
Otherwise, we'll just talk to ourselves.
well, we can talk to ourselves, and we'll have a great time. So you're invited to the party, and then we'll be our party. And we can continue. And I'm just really very interested in your experiences and your seeking and your finding and your reflections. So God bless us all on our journeys.
Thank you, Freddie, for coming.
Thank you.
See you next
Thank
week.
you, guys.
I hope so. They don't offer any transportation there? Not for children. They take you to the doctor.